Welcome to our colleagues from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and we have online Simon, and who else we have online? Some councillors. So today we will be having, I think, 3 areas of focus, and the public hearing will not be happening this week. As you all know, it's extended to mid-August for some technical reasons, and you're all aware of that. I'll pass it to Liam to run us through what we'll be doing today, and when it comes to question time, please just make sure we get the attention of the Democracy Service team on the corner there. They will be passing the list, and then we will go through. And Liam, floor is yours.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, welcome. And staff, we've got a very good spread of staff here today because of the type of project we have. As you know, this is a second joint briefing of Greater Wellington Greater Wellington Regional Council councillors and the City Council. This relates to mostly the Harbour Quays and Eastern Connections project. We've just finished consultation. We have over 1,000 submissions of sorts, and as the Chairman mentioned, we have hearings set for August the 19th. We've got a couple of parts to this briefing, and I wanted to introduce those. The first, of course, is Harbour Quays and Eastern Bus Connections. The second is an update on the Crawley Bus Depot. And the third, we're going to have a break then, and the third will be a request actually from the Wellington City Councillors about the public transport fare structure. So we've got Metlink and their team here to answer those. The first part of the presentation, the stage goes to Paul Barker from WCC and Tamsin Evans, who's Metlink. We have Hamish from Metlink talking about the Crawley Depot project. They've been working closely with us on some land ownership issues there. And Tim Shackleton, also from Metlink, will close out the session after our break regarding public transport fares. So I'll invite up Tamsin to the table with Paul. And we'll crack into it. The PowerPoint presentation was circulated earlier. There's a framework, public transport kind of context there. I think, provided you've read all the slides, this is going to be a reasonably straightforward presentation, and we'll be pausing for questions. So over to you, team.
Kia ora koutou, ko Tamsin Evans toko ingoa, and I'm the Senior Manager Network and Customer at Metlink. So thanks Liam for the introduction. He's stolen a couple of my key lines already, so I'll skip over them. So mainly on the Harbour Quays and Eastern Corridor projects this morning, this is an update for you on consultation. We had, as Liam said, over 1,000 submissions. And the chart there, sorry, the scale on the bottom is percentages, but the numbers are actually that the top line is the 532 people who submitted on Harbour Quays, 110 on Eastern Corridor, and then 379 submitted on both projects. So over 1,000 in a month, which was pretty good. We did quite an extensive couple of letter drops. 2,600 odd letters went out, about 1,000 for Harbour Quays and 1,600 for the Eastern Corridor, selecting a sort of catchment around the areas directly affected. We had 8 drop-ins, I think, including the extra that we put on Johnsonville. And across all of those Saturdays, evenings and so on, we had 143 people attend. Took about a couple of hundred brochures and handed them out at one of the Brandon Street stop one evening. Again, catching quite a lot of people who weren't necessarily aware of the project. And as Liam said, we have oral submissions on the 19th of August. At the moment, we have 19 people wanting to speak to both projects, 35 to Harbour Quays and 13 for the Eastern Corridor and 1 unspecified. As some of you will be aware, normally those numbers will drop off quite a lot by the time you actually get to the hearings. So
There's a trick to how you point it, yeah.
It did work before. It works when Paul presses the button. Right. So we'll going to start with the Eastern Bus Corridor, and for those of you who did get a chance to have a look at one of the brochures, you'll recognise the map here. Because it covers quite an extensive area, we broke it down into sort of communities of interest, and looking from a distance, just to give you an idea, that the green dots are just minor stop improvements that were proposed. The ones that were significant in terms of what we got the submissions on were the red dots, where we're proposing to remove stops, which, as you can see, were mostly around rationalising the distances between stops. In terms of the results of the consultation, we had 64% of the submissions were strongly in support or support of the changes, and 27% in opposition or strongly opposed. The majority of people travel through the corridor by bus, and second most popular mode was car, and that was about 54% by bus and 30% by car. And in terms of people's relationship with the corridor, 35% lived along the corridor, 26% travel through or along the corridor, and 17% used the corridor to visit places on the route. So we asked the question about, does this project affect a bus that you usually use? And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes, which is quite pleasing that we were getting submissions from people directly affected and directly interested in the project. So 72% of the people use a bus that runs along that corridor. So that's, we commonly talk about Route 2 because that's the long one that goes from Situn, Miramar all the way through to Karori. But the 4 and the 14 and other routes use that same corridor, and of course a lot of school buses as well. That tiny section in the middle, the yellow, only about 9% of people who submitted don't actually use the bus along the corridor. So the diagram that you've got there shows you the themes that people submitted on. So for the size of the box inside the larger graphic there indicates roughly the proportion of the themes that came through. So you'll see that the majority were in support and strongly in support, as we said, looking at the pie chart. And pleasingly, from a Metlink point of view, people recognising that the rationale behind the project is about improving travel time and reliability for the buses along that corridor. And recognising that it is actually about high capacity on this route, which you'll remember from some earlier briefings, is about the changes that we need in order to support the increasing demand so that buses can pull into the stops, pull out of the general traffic, and make it easier for people to board and off-board. So there's about 305 people responded to this question. So that's across the 110 who responded just on the Eastern Corridor, and obviously some of the 300 odd who responded to both projects. So the themes that were emerging in terms of opposition. So there's about 119 responses in this diagram. So 300 and something on the previous page. They're both the same size. They're not representing disproportionate, because obviously it'd be slightly too small to read. More themes coming through here. Opposition to bus stop removal or consolidation is probably the one where, in a moment, I'll talk about the submissions in which we'll make some more considered response, as opposed to simply noting the themes about, leave things as it is, or as you've got there, we don't understand the rationale for the project. So one of the key aspects, as I said, was opposition to the removal of bus stops. There's a point which is relevant particularly to Wellington City councillors, which is that if we choose through this process and you support retaining a bus stop we were proposing to remove, we'll need to come back with a traffic resolution, because the traffic resolution we've consulted on was about removing the stop. So there's a little bit of a procedural issue that we'll manage through that one. So as I say, the areas for consideration from the consultation around whether or not we remove bus stops. Obviously, we try to manage the distribution of stops along a corridor to manage efficiency in terms of the journey, but also access in terms of people's ability to catch the bus and get it to and from the points of journey. Some of the stops that we were proposing to remove did attract some comment. Not a huge number, but obviously they're quite individual and user-focused comments, so they're definitely worthy of attention. So Darlington Road was one pair, and Park Road, and in Kilbirnie on Rongotai Road, the one on the south side in terms of access to Pack and Save. So we're just in the stage of going through these submissions and looking at what the responses might be. So we're just giving you a fairly raw overview of the data at the moment and telling you what the key points are. So we haven't got a response for you yet in terms of what the position is around that, but just to reassure you that if you're hearing those concerns from your communities, then yes, we are looking at that through the submissions. Some feedback around the pedestrian crossing, particularly the one in Mount Victoria, which has an impact in terms of parking, but has long been that safe crossing on the corner of Pyrie Street, topical for the Mount Vic community. Shelter provision, pretty topical given the storm last week. Everybody would love to be completely warm, dry and safe at every bus stop. It's not always achievable nor practicable. Sometimes, and you'll be familiar in some of the more sort of retail areas, particularly in the suburbs, as well as Lambton Quay and the Golden Mile, that we use canopy cover from shops and verandas, but also, obviously, bus shelters. Where we have bus shelters, generally, those are the areas we have constraint on what size of shelter we can put on the footpath. So it's not always the size and quantity of shelter that people would like. So we have got some comments that we'll look at in terms of the size of shelter and where we've positioned it. Car parking, some comments, not many, mainly related to Mount Victoria and Hataitai. Relative to the total number of car parks in the area, the ones proposed to be removed is a very small percentage. But again, it's important, and so we will have a good look at those submissions as well. On the last point there, impact on fare boundaries. One of the stops proposed to be removed is the last one on the Mount Victoria side of the bus tunnel, which very good reasons for removing that stop. The buses can't stop safely. There is not enough width in the corridor. And belatedly, my apologies, we realise it's also a fare boundary. So from a policy point of view within Metlink, we'll need to work through exactly what that means about where we reallocate the new boundary to. So next steps, as Liam said, submissions, oral submissions, hearings on the 19th of August. And then we will bring this back to the WCC Regulatory Processes Committee on the 2nd of September to look at the traffic resolutions. Be an update for GW, but GW doesn't actually have any decision-making around this project because it's a regulatory matter. All being well, if the project proceeds, we'll be looking at starting construction at the end of summer 27 in March and have the works completed and operational by the end of next year. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Cool, thank you. Questions, we have Councillor Chang and...
Great, great, thanks. I have a question regarding the bus stop removal. When you decided on which bus stops to remove, was there a passenger count of numbers of people boarding and alighting at those bus stops?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we look at a range of things. Yes, in terms of popularity, how many people use that stop, but we also look at the distribution in terms of the distance between stops. So if we are proposing to remove a stop from a distance point of view, if it's one that has the greater number of passengers using it, then we will look to find that balance between the two. I think in these cases we've settled on the right side in terms of your question, in terms of volume being one of the determining factors about the stops that are remained. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Could I have a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
Right. When considering the distances between the buses, are you still using the 80 metres to 100 metre gap between the two?
400 metres.
400 metres. Great, thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
I've got three questions, if you don't mind, Chair. Just the first question is what are the specific bus stops that you expect are the most likely that we would look at reconsidering the proposal to remove?
Through you, Chair, Darlington Road, Park Road and Rongotai Road, Ross Street, near Pack and Save.
And you said in your presentation there would be an impact on the traffic resolution if we chose to not remove some of the bus stops that we propose. I'm just wondering if you could talk us through the procedural implications of that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll jump in there. So the traffic resolution as we have it now proposes to remove. So we would remove that from the TR that the council would be asked to approve. So that would leave it in place as it is today. But we would like to then take the opportunity to make it longer, increase the taper lengths like we've done to all the other stops. So we'd bring a further traffic resolution then to enhance that stop that would remain. So we have no problem about leaving it. We don't need a TR to leave it, but we will need a TR to upgrade it to the same standard as all the other stops along that corridor.
So hang on, let me follow up on this one. So if you want to leave it as it is, let's say the council make a decision to leave it instead of removing, why can't you bring a recommendation, part of the recommendation, leave it with extending, making it a bit bigger space. Second option would be remove it and do the next one. Why we can't have that? Why we need to go to another traffic resolution? We leave it there and then we also extend it.
So if the current stop was 12 metres long and we want it to be 24 metres long, we will need to go back to the community on that extra distance and any impact that might have on adjacent parking. So we might need to remove a car park either side of the existing stop. And so that would be further consultation with those that would be affected by that additional change. It may be that the committee would recommend that we consult on that, but we won't be able to approve it in one go. It'll need another round of traffic resolutions to do the additional restrictions.
So the consultation didn't bring that option to begin with. Okay, you can follow up, Councillor Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. Just one last question. You also noted that we face constraints in terms of the size of shelter that we're able to provide at different stops. I'm just wondering if you could, other than the obvious constraint of cost, if you could explain the other constraints that we would face.
Through you, Chair, it's often about footpath width in terms of a shelter that provides wind coverage and protection from each end obviously closes off space on a footpath. If the footpath is particularly narrow, that then makes it hard for pedestrians, pushchairs and so on to get round a stop. And so we will use a cantilever stop or a very slimline shelter. So we have different designs. Not every stop can provide the full rain and wind protection of a whole shelter. So it's usually the physical space constraints, not so much cost.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Just a really quick one. I assume that any new stops, we'd have parking would be taken away, but any stops that are essentially removed, would parking be reinstated?
Yes.
So if that is the case, you say there will be a possibility of some car parking loss in totality. Is that because of the extension of the bus size itself, the bus stop size itself?
Yeah, so this proposal was to make consistently available for 2 buses to pull up to the curb. We were seeing that regularly happening along this corridor, which meant that the second bus, if it couldn't get into the curb, sat out in the traffic lane blocking traffic before it could get in. So what the team's done, they've made sure every stop through here will accommodate 2 buses and or an articulated bus that may well run through this corridor, and make sure that there is enough taper to get into the curb and then get out of the curb. So it's quite a long length that we've examined. We haven't done that examination for the stops that are being proposed to be removed. So if we want to retain those stops, the team will go back to that and look at what provision is there now. Can it accommodate 2 buses? And if it can, then it will just stay. If it needs to be lengthened, it will, including those tapers into and out of.
Council Free.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So the first one is, there's mention there about the impact on the fare zone boundaries. Can you explain what the impact actually would be of removing the bus stop where the fare zone boundary actually is right now?
Through you, Chair. Not in detail, Councillor, because it's quite fiddly and I actually don't have the details in front of me. It's more of a Metlink policy issue. It won't come back through this consultation process. It's not a WCC regulatory matter, so it won't come in the committee paper. The fare zone boundaries obviously are between 1 zone and 2 zones. At the moment, on the Mount Victoria side of the tunnel, we have the boundary as you go through the tunnel to Hataitai, and on the return, the stop that we're removing is also the fare zone boundary, so we'd need to formally move that through Metlink policy to the next stop further down on Pyrie Street.
So can you give us some sort of assurance that Wellington bus users are not going to be financially disadvantaged if they're travelling locally and there's some change here compared to the current situation?
Not today, Councillor, I can't. We still need to work through the details.
Also had a question about cycles. Can I ask about that?
One more.
Yeah, thank you. I guess this is possibly more a question for Paul. What's the plan for people currently that cycle along Moxham Ave because they need to get through the tunnel? What's the plan with where they'll be expected to be in the street once we've got these changes? Will there be any change?
Through this project, there's not proposed to be any change for people on bikes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Chang, okay, second round. Here you go.
Yep, just a quick question on the bus stop location. Is there still policy not to have bus stops opposite each other, that is, buses going in different directions? I recall there was a policy that you wouldn't have bus stops opposite each other because it created a very, very small amount of room for cars to pass if there are 2 buses there.
Through you, Chair. I'm not sure it's a policy, Councillor, but obviously safety is the primary concern. And so if there's enough road width, which there is in some places, then yes, you would locate the bus stops opposite each other in terms of making it legible and sensible for people using them. But obviously if the road is narrower, you would look to offset them so that you're not interrupting the traffic flow, but also, as I say, primarily for safety.
Amelia, do we have anyone online who put their hands up? Nope. Councillor Calvert.
So I'm just curious about the consultation. We basically have asked people about one option. If that doesn't end up being acceptable, we then have to go out and consult on another option. Why don't we do that all together? You know, sort of think about, well, if this is not acceptable, or are we assuming that it will go through? Because this is what the purpose of consultation is to, is to get the public's feedback.
Councillor, are you following up on the question that if we decide to retain the current bus stop and we have to consult back, and you're following up on that question?
Yeah.
Okay, any answer to that?
Through you, Chair. The intent of the project was to increase the capacity, as Paul said, on the whole corridor, and that's the proposal that we went out to the community on. Increasing that capacity and looking for the improvements in the general traffic flow and efficiency along the whole route. Yes, there's some proposal to remove some bus stops. We've sought feedback on that. We have some feedback suggesting that people would like to retain some of the stops that we've looked to remove. There is, as Paul said, a technical process around the traffic resolution, should we retain those. But if the recommendation back to the committee and the regulatory committee so chooses, then we would look to retain those stops. That's the purpose of the consultation.
I appreciate that. Really, I'm asking, why didn't we actually put up another option at the same time for consultation? If one option had failed, what was the alternative to, rather than have to go back out again to consult?
The consultation will be a technical consultation on the traffic resolution rather than the substantive consultation that we've just undertaken around should the stop be retained.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else? Cool. I don't see any question on this one, so we can go to the next part. Liam, or who's presenting that to us? Paul, the floor is yours, please. About not Harbour Quay, surely.
Sorry, back to where we were on the previous presentation. Oh. Now we'll just get back. Cool, thank you. Right, we're back on track. So these graphs are really similar to the ones that Tamsin's just shared with you for the Eastern Corridor. So this is the consultation happened together, and Tamsin's run through the submissions we had on each consultation and those that offered to submit on both. So we had 881 answered this question around support for the Harbour Quays. And you can see there strongly support 384 and support 83. So we had 53% support overall for the project to go forward. And then who we heard from, 41% of those that submitted were bus users and 26% were car users. It was, 41 bus, 26 from cars, and this was self-identified as their main way in which they travel through the area. Yep. And we had heard from 14 organisations that submitted through this consultation. So this graph shows that both those whose bus service will use the corridor and who didn't answer the question, compared to the same question regarding the Eastern Bus Corridor, where a high percentage of the survey was completed by those whose buses will be affected. So it's quite different there. We heard from a lot of people that weren't affected by buses on the corridor. And that's obviously to reflect the high number of car users that she made submissions through this as well. In terms of, these are the same graphs, again, similar to those that we shared for the eastern area. The bigger the area, the bigger the theme that came through. And you can see there that those, the biggest, there was a smaller number of big themes than those that opposed, and I'll come to that next. But more importantly there, the themes reflect the project objectives. So people are understanding the reasons and the rationale for why we are doing the project. Changes that will improve travel time, relieve the pressure on the Golden Mile and Lambton Quay, support mode shift away from private cars, and changes to improve access to local destinations all came through in the themes that we heard from the submitters. These are, just a summary of comments that are made. Where this is early, we're still, refining these as we go through the submissions that we're getting in. So again, this slide just shows those that strongly support, and if I go to the next, we see the themes of those that were opposed. Compared to those that support, this is a lot more scattered. It's not the same theme. There's lots of themes come up in opposition to the project, as opposed to the few themes that came up for those that support. One of the key aspects here, as people commented on, was the concern that changes negatively impact traffic, and particularly people commented on the impact the bus lanes might have. Now, we're working through all these comments, but the modelling agrees that there will be an impact on traffic, on general traffic. We've said that outright. But that's outweighed by the benefit that will be to those that are using buses that travel through the corridor. So some of the areas that have come up that the project team now needs to do a bit of work on to both support the business case and the committee paper and any changes that we might want to make to it. So there's several areas in here, and just let me work through these. So bus lanes is clearly an area that was reasonably contentious, came through quite strongly in those that negatively commented. So when we're operating these bus lanes, they'll be the busiest bus lanes in Wellington outside of the Golden Mile. So if they were to be approved as bus lanes in those peaks, they will be the busiest in Thornton Quay, Adelaide Road, and routes coming in from Karori. The proposed service profile focuses on movement on the quays to the peak hours, given it's primarily servicing the express services. So busy at peak, very, very few services off peak. Including outside peak hours, we only expect to see less than 6 an hour compared to the 30 an hour at peak. So a big change between the service profile during the day. And the evenings and weekends will also have that 6 an hour service profile. So introducing bus lanes, and I stress that they are bus lanes, they're not bus-only lanes, and it's also been purported that they will be bus-only, so they will be just bus lanes. That will not have the same effect as reducing the corridor from 6 lanes to 4 lanes, and I'll explain why. So the bus lanes will also accommodate all the existing buses that use the quays for school services, tour coaches, as well as motorbikes will be able to use them. The bus lanes can also be used by emergency services. So we undertook some work in and around access to the Wellington Hospital on Newtown Fair days to sort of understand the impact the bus lanes would have. And those bus lanes in Adelaide Road and Redford Street have provided a great benefit for emergency services getting to and from the hospital when those lanes up there are chocker. So that frees up those curbside lanes to be more free-flowing to enable emergency services to get through the city quicker. But to my mind, the biggest reason why it won't be as bad as complete lane removal is that the bus lanes will continue to provide access for left turners. That's left turners into side roads and into driveways. Now, these movements are often impacted by the need to give way to crossing pedestrians crossing those side roads. So that's all going to continue to happen, but it's going to continue to happen in the bus lane. So the left turners will pull out of lane 2 and move into the bus lane or lane 1 as they're able to do 50 metres before they turn and then stop there and give way. So that's currently a movement that impedes forward moving traffic along the quays that won't impede the 2 general traffic lanes, again easing the burden. We've also received a number of submissions relating to signage of bus lanes and the need to provide a clear message to users. So we'll take our lead of the work that's been undertaken in reviewing the Cambridge Terrace bus lanes that was directed by the City Council to officers as part of the Courtney Place work, the Golden Mile work. And that's going to ensure that we're providing consistency in the way we sign and inform our users of the presence of a bus lane and the hours in which it operates. Moving now to parking, approximately 40 car parks are proposed to be removed for this project. But we're also reinstating 32 car parks to full-time parking that currently have a part-time restriction. That includes the PCAR Clearway on Wakefield Street, the Brandon Street PCAR bus stops, and there's also a Featherston Street affected by the Clearway as well. Analysis of the car parks shows that in areas considered for removal, the paid occupancy is well below 50%. So given the low occupancy, it is therefore highly unlikely that a user will still be able to find, it's highly likely that a user will still be able to find a street car park in the immediate area and pay for that use. It's not affecting the City Council's revenue from that area. So we still expect the same number of people to be able to park and pay. The corridors also served really well with off-street car parks, including the Reading, the Te Papa, the Frank Kitts, TSB, the Williston Street, and then there's a myriad of car parks off the Featherston Street area. We've estimated that there's something like 890 so it's, off-street car parks available for short-stay parking immediately adjacent to the corridor. So the business case, and particularly the financial case, will be updated, as well as the committee paper, to account for the loss of potential revenue, and I stress that that's potential revenue, and it's unlikely to materialise as actual revenue loss because of the low occupancy, and therefore not accounted for in the economic case. So, yeah. It's likely that at least 2 enforcement cameras will also be installed along the corridor to ensure...
Paul, if you just wrap up, we got some questions, so we'll get into it.
I'm just about there. So it's also looking at a couple of enforcement cameras, and it's important to get those in to get good compliance, but we don't expect, we won't be accounting for any revenue from those cameras in the business case or the financial case. We're going to be silent on that. Also, there was concerns come through about we're moving away from the catchment of the Golden Mile. So just touching on that. We need to remember that not all destinations, need to remember that all destinations from the city will still be serviced from the Golden Mile. So people won't have to walk to the quays to catch a bus. There will still be a regular service. The express services will move across. And then the Harbour Quays provides people with choices, and for many people the Quays corridor will be much closer to their workplace. It also provides connection to the attractions along the quays, including Te Ngākau, Te Papa, Te Tikina, and the Wellington Museum. And we also heard from a number of people that wanted the service to move closer, and so there's a lot of submissions in support of actually having a route run through there. So almost my last comments. So other things that we're working through, there's a lot of stuff that we need to put into the paper that will come back for consideration, including just thinking about how we deal with the bottom end of Cambridge Terrace. I'm aware that many of the city councillors will have received submissions from businesses and attractions in the area, so we're just working through how that might work, and that's probably the single biggest point of focus for the project team of how we resolve those issues. So then thinking about where we go next, we talked about the joint submissions, so they will be heard jointly in here by both councillors. We have then got a lot of work to do to update the business case after we've finished hearing all of the oral submissions. We're starting to look at the written ones. The 10th of September, the Greater Wellington will be asked to consider the business case. So not the traffic resolutions, but just the business case that supports this investment. And then it will come back here to the City Strategy and Delivery Committee for approval of both the traffic resolutions and the business case, or endorsement of the business case. And then, when we close it out, we move to construction, and again, we hope to be up and running by the end of next year. Thank you.
Cool. If you just go back to the line before, cool. So on the 10th, Greater Wellington will be making a decision on business case. A week later, City Council will be approving the business case and the traffic resolution both together.
That's correct. So we need endorsement from both councils. Both councils are investing, 5 million into this project.
Yeah.
So and it rates as a significant project, and the City Council, a significant project's business case is endorsed by the council. And then Liam Hodgetts is the senior responsible officer that will finally put his signature to the business case.
So process-wise, without approving the business case, how do you also write a paper for the traffic resolution itself?
You look like you're going to jump in. No, that's together. So the traffic resolution is the consultation. The consultation we're done is for both the business case and the traffic resolution to give effect. So the traffic resolution is the legal instrument to be able to put on the ground. The business case is releasing the funding to actually undertake the works.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chairman, I was just adding that, the importance of consulting prior to minting the business cases based on the public submissions we might receive and any changes that might affect the business case accordingly.
So process-wise, if you're just presenting the business case, are you just presenting a business case that approved by the Greater Regional Council? And if this council, I'm just saying, the process-wise, if this council decide to modify the business case or ask for some work, but you already proposed the traffic resolution itself, and how that play out process-wise is my question.
Yeah, I think so. That, Mr. Chairman, the difficulty here, we have a joint project. I think, Paul, you mentioned 5 million. It's actually 50-50 funded. So it's a $16 million bundle of projects. That's both covered at Harbour Quays at 10 million and Eastern Connections at 6. The awkwardness here is we have a public transport agency who is approving a business case, but we have a road controlling authority who's approving the changes to the road corridor. Both have a say in the impact of the project. So if we do have changes made on the 10th of September, we'll have to quickly understand what they are and whether or not that has any delays or consequences to our approval. But that is what we have at the moment. That's how the process works for both councils.
So are you releasing the paper to us before Regional Council approve itself as well? Because I see 7 days. That means basically the paper should be on Wellington City, from Wellington City Council perspective, the paper should be out for councillors to have a say, before, at least if the Regional Council is approving it, the same business case. We will not be able to see that business case until the day they approve. Is that what it is?
Look, the day in which we released the draft business case or the business case for approval to the Regional Council will all be public that day. So there is no reason why it could not be shared with the City Councillors. The paper that goes with it may not be ready on that day.
Yeah, but
we can certainly share the business case, yes.
A bit in advance. Basically, all we have is we are getting with the public at the same time the business we will be approving later on.
Yep.
Okay.
But unless there is changes to be made after the Regional Council have considered it, it will be the same paper that goes up to both councils.
Okay, I will take it offline. And any other question, councillors? Councillor Calvert.
First up, can I just make a comment? You've got endorse and approve. Maybe it should be determined because you're assuming that it will be approved.
Yeah.
So I think just a choice of language. I noticed that on another slide as well. Can you tell me what, with this council's recent decision about the Golden Mile, and I know the Golden Mile design had some impact on the Harbour Quays design, can you tell me what changes or considerations have been made given that the decision made by this council?
Well, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The only physical change in the design itself is at the intersection of Courtney Place and Cambridge Terrace. So there is a really minor design detail there that we're working through. In terms of the overall planning and the approach, in terms of we took an agnostic point of view from that, and that we were expecting to get the buses on the Golden Mile down to the 70 an hour by removing some and putting them onto the quays. That's still the case. And so the remaining buses will still manage through the Golden Mile with or without the upgrade. Okay.
And can you tell me, have you factored in passengers who who choose to go on the express buses have got further to travel. Is that a factor in that's being included in the business case, or will be included in the business case in terms of, potential disbenefits?
No, it hasn't been.
Will it be?
No, it won't be.
Right, thank you. I've got another question, but it's up to you whether you want to go on this.
Just one more and then.
Okay, just on the occupancy, when you provide us with the occupancy level, I know you say 50%, but I'm assuming that's over 24/7? It would be...
That's through the paid times. So the times in which the parking is able to be paid, we can measure how much we did recover of that paid. So that's the paid occupancy.
Okay, so it's a paid occupancy 8 till 8 or something like that.
Correct, yeah.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Free.
Thank you. Paul, you mentioned that people will have a choice whether they catch a service from anywhere in Wellington. Basically, you can catch a service that will still go down Golden Mile or will take maybe an express route. My interest is in if people want to mix and match a little bit and be able to transfer to, choose an option. What thought has been given to where they might transfer and the sort of information that would be available at the respective bus stops to help people choose that, between a Keys bus service or a Golden Mile bus service? And I'm thinking really of the Kent, sort of around Kent Terrace, that end of Courtney Place. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we acknowledge in terms of transfers and moving from an express route to a more local stopping route, we do need to make it very visible for people. That will mean some changes in terms of our signage and how we talk about the routes that people want to take. What that will look like, I can't tell you today, but we are mindful of it and we will be factoring that in.
Okay. There's no opportunity to have a bus stop that kind of would pick up, like we've got at the hubs.
Not
it would be a very good place to swap.
I don't imagine. I can't answer that's a level of detail I'm not across, but we certainly appreciate the need to make it visible about how you transfer from one service to another.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that, Mr. Chair, we've already ruled out Kent and Cambridge. So if you're coming from the eastern suburbs, you will have to change at Kilburney is your most likely point. Just to come back to that issue of the catchments, if you're catching the 32X, the 31X or the 30X, there are some communities who won't have choice. So if you live in Breaker Bay, if you live in Houghton Bay, if you live in Scorching Bay, you have one service and those are the X services. So, if you're coming here, you will have to walk. It's not a matter of making choices.
Unless you transfer.
Unless you make the transfer, and you'd have to do that in Kilburney.
Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Yeah, just on the enforcement approach, given the Mayor raised issues around the basin December and we still haven't resolved those, will we be able to set some type of policy guidelines where we're wanting to enforce behaviour but not penalise? So for instance, if we have someone that has 3 or 4 incidents in a 1 week period and then nothing afterwards, instead of collecting 3 or 4 tickets, we may say, we've fined you once, you haven't had repeat behaviour. We will not put the other tickets. So basically I'm getting at, can we look at the enforcement approach if we're going to put bus lane tickets for out there as part of the decisions we're putting in here?
Look, as committee, you're able to set that direction. At the moment, the direction that's set is if it's an offence, infringement notice is issued.
Councillor James.
Hello, just on the off-peak services, you mentioned it'd be 6 an hour. I assume that's Airport Express and 24? Okay. So 24 definitely going to be part of that decision, because I know during the consultation it was sort of a bit like maybe 24, maybe not.
It's certainly been factored in at the moment in terms of the business case. In terms of the distance and the route that it follows, it makes sense because it's a long service that passes through the city. And while we don't have express services in that Johnsonville context, it is a long distance service. So it's been factored in at the moment.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm supportive of the 24 being part of it. So,
Councillor Osborne.
A couple of questions, if you don't mind, Chair. I just wanted to talk about the experience of passengers along the harbour quays, and I suppose especially on the seaward side. Just wanted to make sure that all of those new stops will have shelters.
Yeah, that's correct. They will all have shelters.
And those new stops, I presume, given the number of intersections along the harbour quays, will all be very near pedestrian crossings?
That's correct, and they've been positioned just for that.
And are you factoring in any provision of shelter at the pedestrian crossings?
Originally, this project was a bigger project when we expected to receive some co-investment through the Transport Agency. And the scoping of the project at that point did include connections between the Golden Mile and the harbour quays. So it was for shade and shelter at crossings along some of the corridors that don't have good shelter. When the two councils agreed to proceed without co-investment, they dropped it down, and we have the $16 million co-investment on two projects. That was removed from scope at that point to get it down within budget. So in short, no, we're not looking to provide additional shelter other than at the stops themselves.
Okay. Can I ask a question about a different topic?
Quick question. And
Very
answer.
quickly. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of future thinking around the express routes that will use the harbour quays. Is there any consideration to, I mean, most of those express routes now, and most of those express routes are, outer suburb into CBD or vice versa. Is there any consideration to considering making them like a number 2 where they're outer suburb through CBD out to the other outer suburb? And I understand, obviously, you have the general direction of travel is in the morning into the CBD and in the evening out of the CBD. But as we grow our population within the CBD, that may well change. And I'm just wondering if there's...
Through you, Mr Chair.
Long-winded
Absolutely,
question.
Councillor, you're right. And it will, to a large part, depend on the success or otherwise of the bus lanes. I mean, this is small scale to start with, peak hour only, express services only. But the numbers are certainly there in terms of the growth in the future, that potentially other routes can be directed to the harbour quays.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you, Chair. Within the business case, will you be doing sensitivity analysis on growth projections? Will that be included?
I'm pretty sure it has been, yeah, but we can come back to you on that specifically.
Okay, thank you. Just with the draft BCR being around 1.2, that's pretty marginal. So it'd be interesting just to see the sensitivity analysis on that. Also, following on from Councillor Calvert's comments around walking disbenefits, you said that isn't being factored in. Can you explain why?
We don't understand where people come and go from at that end of the trip. So we've got our mesh block, or our census data doesn't get down to the mesh block level for mode of travel. We looked at whether we could get that down to the blocks effectively between Featherston and the Quays, Featherston and Lambton Quay to the terrace. And if we could have understood who from there was a PT user for their travel to work, we could have done that quite easily. But the size in which that gets drilled down to is too large, so it does do effectively from the terrace right through to the Quays. So we don't have the data to understand where the catchments are and how dense they are along each.
I thought I'd seen in the spreadsheets that we were able to look at total travel time, not just time on bus. I thought I'd seen that in the analysis, that there essentially was able to be quantified. But maybe I'll take that offline.
Maybe offline, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We had the question asked very, very early on. We've been doing a lot of work to see if we can get that data, and it just wasn't possible at this end.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. We got second round few people, so I'm just allowing only one question. Councillor Free.
Thank you. Just because I think it is part of the real story behind this work, can both councils have a list of what services are likely to go on this new route immediately, and then maybe in a few years' time, so we can really understand how it might work for customers, having those choices and options?
Yes, certainly, councillor. We can provide you with the ones that are identified as the immediate ones. Future ones, decisions yet to be made, but we can certainly identify some potential.
Some thinking here. And I think that would be useful for the city councillors as well.
Quick question, Councillor Calvert as well. One question.
Yeah, look, I'm just wondering when you address the business case, whether you can address the capacity on the Golden Mile, given the original Golden Mile design was transformed and it was a much narrower space for bus lanes to travel down. So if that's not going ahead, what other things might help the capacity of the buses going down the Golden Mile, i.e. if Brandon Street doesn't get closed off?
I'll just answer that. So we're currently with the Golden Mile work. A resolution was passed to hold a workshop in August and then have a paper in August as well. So that workshop at the beginning of August, that will be what's in scope and what's out of scope of the Golden Mile project. So there we'll get a really good definition from you all about those things exactly. As should Brandon Street stay in? Tony's talked about Lower Cuba and Wakefield, if that should be looked at as an alternative. So those are the things we'll be discussing in that workshop. So at that point, we'll get a really good indication from yourselves about if that is a possibility or not. From the Harbour Quays perspective, to Paul's point, this has been something that's been on the cards for years, a second spine, and we've worked agnostically to the Golden Mile. But to your point, if there was, if you did multiple lanes on the Golden Mile instead, that could be an option, but that will be part of that scoping process we go through with you with the Golden Mile.
Thank you. And that's going to be factored into the business case if need be?
Yeah, if need be.
Before I go to the lucky last, and who's the project manager for this one from Wellington City Council?
So we've got Hamish Lobb in the corner. Hamish is our project manager, and while he's employed by the City Council, this is a joint project, so he's reporting again to both councils.
Okay. Councillor Compton?
Slightly random, but that's me. I know we do traffic modelling, but I'm just curious, have we considered, I know I've raised it with VEDA, around locking off with some cones a lane just to see what it will do to the traffic, particularly in the mornings? Have we just considered just a trial of a month just to kind of see what would happen? Just curious.
No, look, we haven't considered a trial. As I tried to outline on that, there is a lot of benefit of having that third lane available for those that can use bus lanes. And so if you trialled it with coning it off, they would be in the general traffic lane. And we know that when you cone off lanes, that we get that side friction, that the cones themselves really slows down to 30 kilometres an hour because that's what they feel they need to do. So I just don't think it would be a valid test of what would happen.
With that note, councillors, and we finish our briefing for today. And we have a last one. We don't have...
We have a break now.
Let's have a 5-minute break and come back.
Before the break.
We need a break.
I think we'll have a break, Paul, yeah. And we'll come back and we'll deal with Karori.
present on the Karori bus depot. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I'll just get the push button working. Okay, thank you. So, kia ora, my name's Hamish Burns. I'm the Principal Advisor for Bus Assets at Metlink. What that means in reality, I've been given the task of delivering the asset control strategy, which bus depots are a massive part of. So today's briefing is just a short one around Karori Depot, which is a WCC-owned asset. So the bus depot itself is located at 49 Darwin Street in Karori. It's owned by Wellington City Council and is a key public transport facility for the area. The depot itself accommodates up to 17 buses and currently supports the routes 2, 18 and 21, as well as a number of school buses that originate in that part of the city. It's a strategic asset for Wellington's public transport network and is recognised as such within the GW asset control strategy. The depot is currently leased by our operator Kinetic, with the lease due to expire in June 2027. We've recently completed electrification works at the site, enabling it to support a fully electric bus operation. And the plan is that will actually start being fully electric once the articulated buses come into service later this year. So it's been set up to take the first 5 electric articulated buses and other electric buses. Sorry. However, the overall condition of the depot is very poor, as you might see in the photos. It has already been impacting operations with buses bottoming out in potholes, meaning, talking to one of the drivers, they have to get out there with the buckets and shovels and start shoveling gravel underneath the drive wheels of the buses to get them out. So there have been some very rudimentary fixes done there by the operator, but there's no plans for any significant renewal right now. In discussions with the Wellington City Council property team, we've been advised that there isn't any, much funding at all to carry out repairs or renewals to the site. Greater Wellington signalled an appetite to take on greater control from the end of this current lease. So we've talked to officers here at Wellington City Council as well as Kinetic to look what we could do in 2027. This would enable us to access NZTA funding through the continuous program to support the necessary investment to ensure the depot remains safe, functional and fit for purpose for the current contract and the future contracts going into 2030. So officers at Greater Wellington and Wellington City Council will be working together to consider options for GW increasing the control of the site for the future requirements. In addition to that, currently there are prohibition hours on that depot, so it can only operate between 6 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, Monday to Friday. So we're also in discussions with officers here at Wellington City Council to see if we could extend those hours once it's a fully electric fleet. Thank you.
If you were to extend the hours, would that have to go to a consultation?
Probably. We'll just have to go through the resource consent process and see what the impacts actually are.
And just out of curiosity, what would be the cost? Has anyone estimated what the cost to essentially remedy the ground would be? And also you mentioned unlocking some NZTA funding. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Just like all the other PT assets that we control, we can get access to renewal funding through NZTA, obviously if we apply for it and are granted it. Much in the same way as when I was talking about Lambton Interchange the other month, yeah. Sorry, the other question, it just slipped out of my mind. I should have written it down.
Just the cost. Do we have an estimated cost?
So talking to Kinetic, they had an engineering company do some figures. It was about in 2018, and the cost for remediation at that stage was about $450,000. It's not just the surface; there's also the underlying stormwater work that needs to be done there.
Thank you, Councillor Chung.
Great, thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. First of all, the operating hours. if they were extended, if a resource consent application was actually put in, is the reason for the restricted hours because of the noise that's created at the bus depot? So would neighbours have to be engaged about the noise? And if that was the case, then with the bus depot going fully electric, then that noise would be reduced, wouldn't it, or eliminated?
That's right. There's a couple of things there. There's bus movement noise and there's the changing from the diesel to electric. Essentially, the plan would be to get an acoustic engineer in there and do some pre-modelling and some post-modelling and see what that looks like. And then get in discussion with officers here to.
Okay. Sorry, one more? Is that okay? So at that depot, is there any facility there for the bus drivers to actually, is there a toilet? Is there a place for them to have rest, or is that actually going to be part of the resource consent as well? Like, would that be extended, or?
So currently at the depot, it's an interesting place. If you haven't been there, it's quite an eye opener. There is the original maintenance facility there. Mm-hmm. The current operator has got portacoms within that facility, where they've got some staff facilities. So there are toilets, etc. inside there. There's also a small building at the entrance to the depot site, which the staff also use to a level. That building does need quite a lot of remediation as well. So that would be part of the plan.
Okay.
No, I'll pop you to the bottom. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks,
Okay.
Councillor Chung. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I may have missed this at the beginning. What's the leasing arrangements for the depot as it currently stands? And so a few ones. So what's the leasing arrangements and ownership structure? How does this sit in the suite of depots that we have in the Metlink universe? And which routes does this serve? Thank you.
Easy. So the current lease is between Wellington City Council and Kinetic, the operator, and that finishes in 2027. So I think No, it's not part of Tranche 1. So this is actually part of Tranche 3. So this will be the satellite depot for Cowrie Street. Yeah. Oh, sorry, and the routes. So 2, 18, 21, and some school services.
Oh, and in the suite of our depots, where's this sit on absolutely bougie best one and one we don't want to draw attention to?
At the moment, it's definitely not on the bougie end of what's in the network. I'd probably relate it pretty closely to the depot that's in Wainuiamata, which is pretty rudimentary.
And are there arrangements there to upgrade that one also in Wainuiamata, or?
That's part of Tranche 2. So we're just looking at the future for that one. That's a different use case again. So.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Rubai.
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned stormwater works that could be needed, and since the costings were in 2018, and I would assume the costings are much larger now, is there any appetite for either Wellington Water or on 1st of July Te Ake Wai to pick up some of that stormwater work stuff? So is there a partnership going on, or...?
To be honest, right now we're just looking at options for the control, and we're going to have to revisit any design work we're doing and just get everything aligned before we go much further.
Sure, thanks. Thank you. Councillor Free.
My questions were actually the same as Yardner's.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Thanks. You just mentioned this depot was the satellite depot of the new Cody Street depot. Can you just explain how that process works?
Essentially, this depot is at the other end of the routes from Cowrie Street. Cowrie Street will have the maintenance facilities. It's got the wash plant. It's set up to look after the buses. This is very much buses need to go there so they're ready in the morning to get out on the first services and have enough facilities there so that staff are catered for in a decent way.
Thank you. Councillor Chung.
Going back to the operating hours of the bus depot, if they were extended, if they were extended to say, 18 hours a day or whatever is required, would the utilisation of that depot be enhanced significantly?
What it does, it opens up more opportunities for service design. When you've got very prohibitive hours, it's sort of what you've got now is what you've got now. Having the option to go slightly wider just opens up the possibilities for service design.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
Can I just clarify, what are you asking of Wellington City? Support with the resource consent, or are you asking for money?
Neither.
Oh, good.
Neither. No. So the work I'm doing with the teams here at Wellington City Council right now is just making sure that we can understand each other's long-term requirements. As you might or might not be aware, there is social housing right around that site. So we need to make sure whatever we're doing is in collaboration with each other, and we're not stepping on each other's toes.
So have you looked at a different site rather than that site?
Sites down there in Karori are quite hard to find. It is a historic bus depot that's been there for a long time. There have been property searches for depots all over Wellington.
Because I'm just thinking the biggest piece of land that I know is on the outskirts of Karori, and that's the corner of Curtis Street and Old Karori Road. Which just doesn't seem to have anything on it?
We went for a walk around there the other day, so that has been looked at as well. I suppose what we've got here, we've got the immediate requirements, and the Karori site is really good for that. But we still have to look into the future as well, and weigh up what the future actually looks like. So,
because I'm just thinking the Karori site is better for housing, whereas looking at a space that may not be quite at the other end of the line, but still close enough if the buses can turn into, which is I don't know, it's industrial or commercial land that could potentially be a good option. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do any other councillors have any questions? Okay, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you.
We're now going to move on to the PT Fair update presentation.
Indeed, and just welcoming Tim to present to this. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Thank you once again for having us here on this beautifully fine morning. My name is Tim Shackleton. I'm the Senior Manager of Strategy and Investments at Metlink. There's been a number of requests to talk about fairs and fair architecture, so we thought we'd just present a bit of a 101 on how fairs come together. Highlight some of the key trade-offs between our fair system, so some of the questions that we commonly get asked, and maybe a discussion about what the future fairs might look like, and more than happy to field questions about fare capping or integrated fares, because that's clearly something that we're also quite excited about. So I think we had the right presentation there. If we can just get that one back again, will be great. That's it. Oh. Okay, no, that's the one. So if we can share that one, that will be fantastic. So once again, we'll look at the architecture, the policy, and then a discussion of free fares and next steps. Any questions, please just interrupt on the way through. We're not looking for any feedback, but any feedback is always welcome out of this process. Didn't come off too well, did it? Okay, so context, Metlink has about 200,000 unique customers that travel on our network every year, and our fares account for about $100 million of revenue, and we have actually quite a complex fare system, so we have about 973 fare offerings. What's really key, and this is where it gets quite difficult, is there's three primary sources of funding for public transport in the region. You'll hear the National Land Transport Funding mentioned as we had by Hamish just a minute ago. So about half of our after fares funding comes from NZTA. We also have our targeted rates through public transport, and then of course fares are on top of that. It's been an interesting dynamic over the last 5-6 years. So about 25% of the total cost of providing public transport is now covered by fares. So only 1 in every $4 of service costs are covered by fares, and there's some very good reasons for that, which we've gone through with our council on a number of occasions. But it's clearly something that the government's encouraging us to increase through a process called private share. As we've said, the majority of increases have come down to a lot of deliberate changes we've made in the past, including fleet electrification. In fact, Hamish was talking about that, the infrastructure we need to put in place, living wage increases, and we also had some quite significant overcrowding issues about 5-6 years ago. So we needed to add more capacity to address those, essentially. One of the things that we often look at when we're setting fare policy or fare pricing is that every $2.8 million of fares or income to the regional council generally is the equivalent of about a 1% rates rise. So we try and look at the two at the same time. So if fares go down, then generally rates go up, because quite often the NZTA share doesn't change. Sometimes it does, but not very often. So go for the next slide. What's the direction do I need to point in? Oh, yep, there we go. So as part of Fares 101, there's 4 key concepts. There's the fare structure, so that really just defines, and this is the one that gets a lot of attention, how does the price of a fare change with the distance travelled and maybe the time of day, or sometimes if you use a ferry versus a bus, what's the difference? A fare product is basically what sort of ticket are you buying, and do you get some sort of discount associated with that ticket? Concessions are another hot topic we often get, which is essentially you have an eligibility to a certain demographic to receive a special discount. And that process can be quite complex, and it can be quite a lot of administrative work. And we won't talk about it today, but one of the things that's quite noticeable on our network is how we manage revenue protection. So that's the ways and means we enforce ticketing and fares payment. And that differs quite significantly, both across New Zealand and the world. So just talking about the fare structure, these are many and varied across the world, but generally the 4 most common, or 4 of the common that you see, particularly throughout New Zealand, is we have a sub-regional zone, which is basically having very large blocks of a city, and that every time that you cross one of the zones into another block, the price or the fare escalates. We also have flat fares, but this is changing in New Zealand, so you can just say the whole city, single journey will always be the same price. That comes with benefits and complexities. Our fare system in the Greater Wellington region is called concentric zones, which is essentially we've got zones like layers of an onion sort of spanning outwards. And this was decided deliberately. It works quite well based on the topography of Wellington, where we've got 2 very clear transport corridors, and they sort of spiral out from the CBD, which makes concentric zoning quite a valid approach from a geographic perspective. And then the one that we're looking at the future, in fact we're hoping to go in the future, is called a distance-based fare structure. And this basically says for any point-to-point journey you pay for the distance covered. And there's 2 different ways that you can do this. You can do it based on the actual distance travelled on the service, so how far your train or bus travelled, or you can do what we call as the crow flies. So it doesn't care how you got from point A to point B. It actually takes the geographic or the Google Maps distance between point A to point B. And that sometimes is a bit fairer because we do have indirect journeys that you might want to take in the Greater Wellington region. Our train corridors are great examples. They're not, if you're going from the Hutt Valley through to Porirua, they're not particularly direct routes. So as the crows flies, distance-based structure might provide more of an incentive for those journeys. So those are the 4 that we've considered. And the one that we're currently at, and we've had for a while now, is the concentric zones, but we are looking at going to the distance-based. One thing that we quickly learn about fares is there's no right outcome, and this might be a little bit of a theme of this presentation today. There's always pros and cons with each system, and it really depends what our council and councillors want to achieve. Sub-regional zones is obviously what Auckland use. A lot of complaints they often get is it's quite a significant bump in price when you cross one of those zone boundaries. And for a lot of people, they could live right next to a zone boundary, so you could take a relatively short journey and get quite a high price from it. And then there are other journeys that the Auckland Transport team tell me that could actually travel for about an hour and a half and not cross a zone at all, so you pay a cheaper price. So then you get that sort of discussion around equity. However, from a simplicity perspective, it is quite easy to understand, and the zone boundaries are relatively few, so it's quite an easy system to implement as well. At the other extreme, or the most extreme, You've got distance-based, which basically means it will calculate the distance between where you got on the bus and got off the bus, or where you got on the train and got off the train. And it's highly correlated to your distance travelled, or your time travelled is very highly correlated to the fare that you'll pay. So it's probably the most equitable approach you can take. Once again, that comes with quite a lot of system complexity, so you actually have to put all that maths into the back end of your ticketing system to know exactly every single journey combination that a person could potentially take, which in our case, we've got over 3,000 bus stops and 48 train stations, and those combinations are nearly unlimited, so they'll be in the millions, if not billions. It's also quite hard for the user to understand exactly how much they're going to pay. But that's not unusual. Most people take the same journey over and over again, so you gradually get to understand what you're paying. But as a first-time user, you will struggle to know what you're going to pay because that's quite hard without the assistance, obviously, of some online tool. And then flat fare, everybody loves this because it is a very simple ticketing system. If anyone's been down to Christchurch, they currently have a flat fare system. The reason they're able to implement the national ticketing solution so early is with a flat fare system, you don't even need to tag on and tag off. You literally just tag on once, it deducts a flat fare, and then it's completely ambivalent of when you get off the bus or the train or the ferry, because you've paid your fare once you got on and that's it. So it actually provides a huge amount of simplicity, but it also provides a huge amount of cross-subsidisation. So it's not seen as particularly equitable. And when we've got fares that range between, I think we're about $2.20 and $18.50 if you go to the Masterton nowadays, there's a very big discussion to be had about that level of cross-subsidisation, and would that be seen as fair as well? That essentially the same person living in the Wellington region would pay the same as somebody living in Masterton. So I guess the takeaway is no perfect solution, but there are a variety of options. Just a little bit more detail, I won't go through this slide, and that's our concentric zoning system as it currently stands. There was a little bit of a discussion about moving a zone boundary and what does that mean. So the mechanics is simply, if you cross a zone boundary, then your price escalates. It's typically by about $1.50, so you'll pay $1.50 more every time you cross one of those boundaries. That will change a little bit with integrated bus and rail fares. It means that obviously you'll have a free transfer between the bus and the rail. So as long as you don't cross a boundary, you should be paying the same price. Currently we have 14 zone boundaries, but with our new Tūhono trains and integrated fares, we will be going potentially up to 20. So it could be, upwards of $30 for the longest distance journey to Palmerston North. So there are some changes that will be coming in the near future in that space as well. So I might stop there. That's kind of our fare structure as it currently stands. If there's any questions on the fare structure, maybe I'll take those now.
Councillor Calvert.
Yeah, I've got a couple too. First up, the commercial differential, businesses in the downtown area of the city pay, I understand, 7 times the general rate within Greater Wellington to help fund public transport. Given what we know about commercial businesses, and this council's looking at lowering the differential, is Greater Wellington considering that and considering the fairness of that system or that part of the system?
Yeah, good question. It's not the presentation for today, but in terms of the allocation of PT rates is something that we're currently looking at the moment, and a lot of that comes down to the cost to serve to provide PT to the various parts of the region. So it's a piece of work we're working on. We're also looking at our ratings policy going forward, and that's something that will be considered as part of our wider long-term planning process to identify the sources of funding for that LTP as well. So the answer is not today, but it's definitely something that will be considered as part of our LTP process, and clearly some other engagement that we could have with that council, this council, if that is of interest.
And you made a comment about the flat fare, about sort of cross-subsidisation, and probably it's not the fairest of systems. So are you planning on doing any modelling? We're coming into a general election, and you've got one political party saying we're going to have a flat fee of whatever. Have you thought about the implications of that on your system?
Yeah, so we've got some fare products in terms of fare capping. We've got a couple of slides at the end. We can talk about what those implications might be if we go through the fare products at the end. But yes, there would be some significant impacts on the network potentially that we'd need to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question actually from Councillor Randall, who's not here, but he will watch the recording. He's asked, can the Greater Wellington Regional Council update provide Greater Wellington Regional Council feedback on whether the fare structure review will or will not include a review of the Wellington City fare zones as previously requested by the Wellington City Council?
Through your chair, I think the fare zones is something that we look at from time to time. At the moment, the key deliverable for us is the national ticketing solution. So our fare structure is somewhat locked for the next 12 to 18 months while we implement what the current national ticketing fare structure is. We've sent our technical requirements to India. They're being built as it currently stands. But in terms of the LTP and funding process, we can consider that as a longer term measure. But in the short term measure, we're a little bit locked into the national ticketing solution in terms of what that specification might look like.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chung?
I have 4 questions, so I can go on to the list after that. But the first comment I've got to make is that in your presentation here, you said that we have a stagnant patronage growth. Now, that seems to conflict with some of your colleagues who say that the patronage is going to grow, and that's why we need the harbour quays. So do you guys actually talk to each other about that?
Yeah, so the stagnant patronage growth was really over the last 5 years. So we talked about what our share was. It went from 40% to 25% in terms of fare recovery. And a lot of that was based on behavioural changes in terms of travelling patterns. We see significant reductions in Fridays and Mondays now. And that essentially, we had a trajectory before that, before COVID, and this is why we always say pre-COVID and post-COVID, but the travel behaviour pre-COVID was a 6% year-on-year growth, and that essentially stagnated for about 5 years. And as of last year, we are now at record levels of bus patronage, and our rail services are still struggling a little bit. So that's where the challenge area stands. So we're not saying it's stagnating now; it is definitely growing now. But for the last 5 years, yes, we had a change to behavioural travel patterns, and that clearly stagnated us for about 5 years.
That's great. Explain that. Thank you.
Councillor Chung, I'm just going to give you one more question. We've got quite a list, and then there's also a lot more to get through in terms of the presentation. So just one more question, please.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Looking at the distance system of charging for fares, so looking at the long distance fares, do you think it's equitable to actually have such inexpensive fares on the long distance like Kapiti, or to Wairarapa? Because the council policy or the council. What the council objective is actually to get more people into the CBD. So we want more people living in the central city where we can actually share in the infrastructure that we have here. So why is it in our interest to actually make it cheaper for people to come from further away and make it cheaper for them to travel long distances? Wouldn't that be? That's an argument, and there's one slide in the future that actually has that argument included as well. And there's also counter arguments to that as well. And this is why the fare policy is such an interesting area of discussion, because it's how much you value each of those arguments is where you'll land in terms of the fare policy. But yep, fully agree. And then there'll be a slide that'll actually include those arguments in there in a very probably about 3 slides ahead. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Free.
Yes, thank you, Tim. I've been asking for the fare review specifically for Wellington for the boundaries, and I understood that we were going to be able to consider this early next year, around February or something like that, because when we talk about equity and wanting to move to distance-based fares, it's quite clear that Wellington is disadvantaged in that respect, and that they're paying the same fare for much shorter distances. And in fact, Wellingtonians are subsidising their own public transport to quite a high degree compared to other parts of the region. So my basic question is it not true that we can consider the number of fare zone boundaries at some point this triennium? And I was told, I believe, early next year.
So I think our annual fares review will be in February next year, 2027. And yes, our council consider whatever fare structure it likes. I guess we've got a little bit of a blackout period because we've got to make the national ticketing solution. We've got to deploy that in the next 12 to 18 months. But the stage 2 after that's stable and ready is, yes, we can consider what the next stage will be. The public consultation that we did about 3 years ago recommended distance-based, so that's where we landed. But the council can obviously review that decision if they wish.
But distance-based would seem consistent with fewer fare zone boundaries in Wellington City.
Well, distance-based basically means there is no fare zones boundaries. It's just the distance that you will travel on a journey between your bus stop or between your train stations. So there wouldn't be fare zones. There would just be unlimited combinations of distances that you could potentially travel.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Just to add some clarification to that, that does not mean that there may not be a difference in the fare based on the amount of distance that you travel. So if you travel 100 kilometres, it may be less or per kilometre than if you travel 3 kilometres.
Yeah, so the way we see it is a little bit like a taxi fare. So you have your flag 4, which is your sort of set price to begin with, and then there's a per kilometre rate. And that per kilometre rate may change with time or it may not. That's a decision of the council in terms of that fare-based structure.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Yeah, look, just the third person to jump on this point, but this Wellington City Council really do want to see that review of the fare boundaries. When would you be moving to a distance-based model?
I think our transition to the National Ticketing Solutions planned for the middle of 2027, and it's really key that we get that embedded in because there are a number of benefits that need to happen. I think with any substantive change to our fare structure is probably going to be 6 to 12 months after that, realistically, once that's done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask officers, we will move through the next part of the presentation. Can we try and keep it high level? I'm just conscious of time so that we can allow a lot more questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just try and get one or two key points on every slide. This one's an interesting one. This talks about the number of zones travelled, and as you'll see, that 80 to 90% of all regional trips start and end in Wellington City, and this basically shows that the CBD is obviously a key destination for most bus and rail passengers, and 70% of all trips are 3 zones or less. So the 1, 2, 3 zones are by far and away the largest volume of all the trips that we see on our network. And as you can see, the number of zones drop off quite rapidly in terms of usage as you go out to the higher levels. And we've just got a graph there which you can see at your leisure around, where the various TAs are and where the most likely distance travelled or zones travelled through will be. Concessions, there's a list of all of our concessions as it currently stands. We'll be carrying this into the National Ticketing Solution. We don't envisage any significant changes. However, we might just talk about Super Gold at the very end if we've got time, because the way that the Super Gold's managed will change with the National Ticketing Solution. This is also changing the demographics. This is quite interesting on board. Our services is changing quite dramatically. We're seeing a significant increase in children on our network, and we're also seeing a decline in the adult demographic. And that's part societal, and it's part probably an ageing population. But we're heading towards about 50% of all our bus and rail customers will actually be on some sort of concession. So about half of everybody using public transport is receiving some sort of discount through some sort of concession mechanism. So that's an interesting dynamic, because when we talk about getting people on concessions, it's not about small demographics, it's about half of our users that are in that space. And that's our last example of zonal pricing. So that's just a reference table of the last price increase we put through, and you can see we've got 14 zones, and then we've got concessions, and peak and off-peak there as well will also be a consideration. So that's essentially how the fares come together and the components that we can change, or the levers that we can pull. Now just to probably spend 5 minutes on the fare policy setting. So this is how our current council got to the fare structure that we've got. Sure.
Just one thing that I think I should surface, because I hear the comments about going to a single fare system, fare boundary in the Wellington City area. And I think what I just want to uncover for the city councillors here is that there's don't know if you'd call it a cultural difference, but certainly there is a difference between the regional council and the city council. And that is that we are a network operator and we work for a network. 5 of our city councillors are based here in Wellington City. The vast majority aren't. And so that's the dynamic that we have to work through. Whatever we agree to in the Wellington City has to make sense for the rest of the region and the rest of the councillors. And I know that that's not the way that you approach this, because you're thinking within the Wellington City area, but just be mindful that that is one of the considerations that we have to, that we will end up having to agree. And if we can't massage a single zone for the Wellington City area, it will be because we haven't got the agreement of the councillors from outside of the city area. Kia ora. Speech over.
So an interesting one. I think this slide just summarised the complexity of fare policy design, hopefully in just one space. And this is why we say there's no right outcome to fare policy setting, and we all try and seek, better simplicity, fairness, affordability. Some look at the economic benefits, but they're all totally valid. You can take your own approach, and it's how you want to balance the trade-offs between all of them. If you make something simple, it probably won't be that equitable. You'll be, if charging people the same amount, then you don't really have a particularly good user pays approach. Affordability, sometimes people's ability to pay needs to be taken into account. And then we have got some external factors that we need to take into account, which is obviously if we put fares down, then rates have to go up. So we can't just drop fares for everybody without there being an equal and opposite reaction on rates. We also pay a lot of attention to the cost of private car driving, which is great at the moment when fuel is expensive, but when fuel's cheap, if we're too expensive, we do see people move back to the private car. And then our network capacity is another consideration. So if we've got spare capacity, then obviously the cost of filling up that spare capacity is pretty low. If we've got already full buses, which is the approach at the moment, and we have to add capacity, then having really low fares may impact our operating costs as well. So there's a lot of considerations in there, and all considerations I think are valid. It's really how much weighting do you put on each of those. Just 2 examples there where you've got completely direct trade-offs that we see. People ask us for more simple fares, and then the next thing we know, we've got a system. We ask, the simplicity drives the fact that everyone has to pay the same fare. Isn't necessarily fair if you're taking a journey that takes an hour and a half versus one that takes 5 minutes. And then you've got the trade-off between customer affordability, which is the fare that they pay, and then ratepayer affordability. And in the past, we've tended to go down the fairer path, and that's now why we've got 900 plus fare top products, and everyone asks us for more. We've got to say, well, we need to simplify things before we add more. And from an affordability perspective, that's probably why we're down to about 25% cost recovery on fares, because that's been a priority of the council in the past, but is not a priority necessary that we can continue sustainably. For Councillor Chung's comment, this is the slide. He said, obviously we want to encourage reward inner city living, because those shorter distance journeys is something that we want to encourage. That's right up there in the top left-hand corner of that table, as an argument for why you'd have cheaper fares closer to the CBD, and why you might want to move zones 1 and 2 into 1. That could be an argument for that. Then you've got the counter arguments for longer distance journeys being, which is PT is predominantly here, or at least in NZTA land is here, to remove traffic congestion. That's why we're so heavily subsidised, because we'd have to invest in more roads, more maintenance, and the travel times would be slower. We simply couldn't take all the people that use PT today and dump them on the motorway at rush hour. It just wouldn't work. So there are other arguments around your benefits of longer distance travel. You'll get more congestion benefits, particularly people travelling from Porirua and the Hutt Valley. So I can go through all the arguments there, but there are over the years, I guess we've collected a good dozen or so. And once again, nobody's right, nobody's wrong. They're all valid arguments. It's just how much do you weigh each of them up? And some of them are directly countervailing to each other. So it's quite a hard one. The way we took our policy through is we raised these countervailing forces with our council. And I said, well, how much do you value? What sort of outcomes do you value the most as part of our fare setting policy? And this was taken through into the regional public transport plan, and we also publicly consulted on it about 3.5 years ago. We got over 1,000 pieces of feedback at the time, and out of that we basically created a new fare structure. which is intended to go live as part of the national ticketing solution, which if I have time, I'll very briefly talk about. But that was what we took to our council there. And they said, we're not too concerned about simplicity. We are concerned about social good. We are concerned about mode shift, which is congestion on the roads. And there was a variety of other considerations that policy took into account. We don't make fare changes in isolation. We're part of an international benchmarking study that actually says, in terms of short and mid to long distance journeys, are we relatively affordable? So we do try and see that we're comparable to other cities around the world. And while most people strongly disagree with the slide, we are actually relatively affordable. There's 44 cities that are surveyed that we're part of a survey, and we generally come in the top 5 to 10 every year. And it's looking at the average wage or the minimum wage associated in that region versus the average cost of public transport. So that's just a bit of context. We don't make fare changes in isolation. We do take into account international benchmarking studies, and we do this every year and take this to our annual fares review in February. We also benchmark our cost against driving. This would look awesome now thanks to the cost of petrol. But I think the takeaway from this slide is generally when you hit 3 people in a car, it is cheaper. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. When you get 3 people in a car, even with parking in the CBD, it's cheaper to drive. And when you have 2 people travelling independently, then it's cheaper to take public transport. At the moment, that's probably tilted more in favour of public transport thanks to the cost of petrol and diesel. But that's a benchmark that we do as part of our annual fares review. And I've managed to make it to pretty much the last slide now, which is just looking at the future functionality that both councils can expect going forward. The National Ticketing Solution is getting a lot of airtime at the moment, and it's been an incredibly challenging project, but we can assure you it is almost guaranteed to happen now. We've always been committed, and there's some very strong messaging coming out of Auckland Transport from last week. I was up there with their team on Friday, and it's clear that this is going to happen. So I think we're 90% certain now. But the key things that this will mean for people in our region is you'll now have integrated fares. So that means bus, ferry, rail. Doesn't matter what combination of journeys you take, that will be a single fare that you will pay. And for many people, that will mean a cheaper fare when they take a bus-rail combination. So there's quite a few people in that category. Fare capping, I think everybody knows what a fare capping is. We have a much less generous approach than may have been suggested in the news a few weeks ago. Our one will be fare capped by zone. So essentially, your fare cap to Marston won't be the same as your fare cap if you're travelling around the CBD. This one might be quite good from a way to actually encourage more affordable CBD travel. That's one of the tools that we can use. We can set a relatively low fare cap. So it might be the same as the zone boundary argument, or at least might go part of the way to, if we want to incentivise certain journeys of certain lengths, then we can look at fare caps. And that has quite a strong effect on affordability. And I'll just finish the slide and then open to questions. Cash payments, our council has agreed to remove cash from our network. So that's going to happen by March next year. And there'll be a process that will be running internally at Metlink to remove the cash. It's really important to note that it's cash off board. So we're getting cash off the trains and off the buses. It doesn't mean you can still use cash, but you'll either need to go to a retailer or a ticket vending machine, of which there'll be a couple of part of the national ticketing solution. But the cash usage is so low now on some of our services, we're heading towards 2% or less. So it's a huge cost, and it's also a health and safety risk for our bus drivers and our train staff, which we'd like to mitigate.
Tim, I just thought it might be good also to mention Extraordinary coming on board, because our council colleagues might not know about that.
Cool. Okay. Yep, definitely. Last one, concessions. The 2 things to know about concessions changing is we'll actually have a wider base for concessions for our travellers. Like the moment you have to be a school child to get a 50% child concession, it'll be age-based going forward. So you could be a trade person that's working in a trade at 18 years old. You will still get a concession at that point. When you turn 19, you won't. But at 18, you'll still get a concession. You don't need to be at school. So it's a small change. The one that's going to be a really big challenge for my team is trying to get the Super Gold card users to actually register. So they'll need to register online for that concession. At the moment, all they need to do is, everyone's aware, they need to show the Super Gold card, and there'll be a process with that. And we're working through integrated event-based ticketing. And as our councillor just mentioned, we are actively promoting a product called Extraordinary. And there was an IRD tax ruling that was made last year that public transport should be fringe benefit tax or FBT free, and we've been actively encouraging all other organisations in the region to uptake it. So essentially any staff member that signs up to a salary sacrifice scheme with extraordinary will be able to use their pre-tax salary, and for most people earning over $60,000 a year, that's a 30% discount on public transport effectively. So there's a lot of material online about it. There's quite a lot on Facebook and social media that we've been actively promoting. Thanks, Tom. Looks good. And we'll really strongly encourage this council to consider it as well, because for regular PT users, we believe it can save up to $900 to $1,000 a year in their public transport cost. Obviously at the expense of the government in terms of the tax, the pre-benefit prior to tax being added. So thanks for the heads up, and it'd be really interesting if this council's interested in adopting that as well. Yes, we are. Yep.
Thank you. Is that the end of the presentation?
That is the end of the presentation. So, I think that's it. I think the key things as discussed is there's LTP funding discussions, and that might be a discussion around rates and the PT targeted rate. That's going to be around October to December. Our annual fares review, which is the best time for the fare structure discussion, that will be held in February 2027.
Okay, thank you. We've got Councillor Free, then Councillor Chung, and then Councillor Randall. By me.
I hope this is a quick one. But you mentioned it's only 25% fare recovery at the moment through rates, I presume. But I know in Wellington it's more like 70%. So how is the 25% calculated? Fare box recovery. But can you explain?
Yeah, so we essentially our operating cost for public transport in the Wellington region is about $400 million, and fares are covering just under $100 million of that $400 million, which is 25%.
But presumably there's quite a variation throughout the region with the amount of fare box recovery. That's
right. I mean, as I said, 70 to 80% of all journeys are in the Wellington City Council region. So most 70 to 80% of, I wouldn't say by value, but 70 to 80% of our fares come from that part of the region.
Okay, but not 70, 80% of the spend?
Not by value, it'd be less, because obviously the longer distance journeys earn us more. So,
thank you. Councillor Chung?
Great, thanks very much. How much... two questions, if that's okay. First question is that how important do you regard utilisation on the buses? Like, for example, during off-peak hours, sometimes the buses can run very, very lightly. So is the software work in actually adjusting those fares? Say, like, you might have a special, like Waitomo has a cheap day on a Thursday, so they discount their petrol significantly. So would it be an idea for you to, say, discount the fares on a Monday and Friday when so many people don't come to work, to actually encourage them to actually use the bus on Monday and Friday? Would that be feasible?
I think we have looked at it, so it's a good question. I think that the biggest cost for us is actually managing the peak times, because we've got like 100 buses that we only ever use for 45 minutes a day, typically between 7:30 and 8:30. And that's a huge cost of carrying all those buses, the maintenance, the potential drivers for them. So in the past, we've offered an off-peak discount to move people outside that period. The utilisation for other types of the day, that's not quite as significant in terms of the cost savings we might have. There could be some savings associated with that, but probably wouldn't be as much as the off-peak. So we've tended to focus on very large different discounts for the peak, for the off-peak to get people away from the peak, and that's probably where the biggest savings are. But if we were concerned about probably lesser savings, then that could be a potential option, trying to encourage people in times we have capacity. But at the moment, we don't tend to have too many capacity issues outside that sort of 7:30 to 8:30 time at the moment.
Oh, yeah, okay, thanks. So the second question is regarding fare increases. Is there any analysis on whether it makes any difference to people? Like when your recent fares went up, I don't know, a couple of % or something. So did people stop, or did fewer people travel because of that increase, or does it not make any difference to them?
Oh, that's a good question. So we do elasticity analysis. So it's kind of, we can go into some very deep technical terms, but yes, we do elasticity analysis on fares. What we find, it's diminishing returns. Very small incremental amounts don't make a huge difference. Large jumps and changes can trigger behaviour change. So we try, as a council policy, to avoid very large jumps in fare prices and try and put small, regular fare changes through. And then the externalities, we said the cost of driving is also very important as well. We've got to make sure that we're competitive in that space, because if we're not, then regardless of how much we put fares up and down by, it may be just cheaper to drive. And for a lot of people, that's a very deliberate decision they make when they use PT. If I can get a park in town, it's cheap, and the car's cheap, well, that's probably what I'm going to do. So yes, we don't try and make big fare changes all in one go, and at the same time we also look at the cost of substitutes, essentially, to make sure we're competitive.
Thank you. Just one more question while we've got our colleagues here. Councillor Randall would like an update on the implementation of the planned Johnsonville bus interchange, including the Greater Wellington Regional Council funding support of it. Can we answer that today, or is that within your purview?
Hello. So in the next financial year, so 26-27, we do have funding in our annual plan to do the business case around the transport hub in Johnsonville. So that will be ongoing.
Okay, thank you. He'll be delighted to hear that. Do councillors have any further questions? Councillor Free?
Were you going to say something about the gold card, Tim?
Yes, so I think that we briefly mentioned it before. There'll be a number of changes with the national ticketing solution, which up there is mid-2027, and probably one of the biggest challenges for us will be to get Super Gold Card users to register for that concession, which will be great from our perspective, because when a Super Gold Card user gets on board a bus and a train, we just don't know where they're going, so we can't tailor our services. We get no data, because essentially all we get is a visual identification. But in the future, the concession will be loaded against whatever card they decide to use, whether it's a physical transit card or a credit card. We'll need to get them to register, and obviously that might be a process that could be quite involved and take quite some time. So it was just a heads up that it's coming.
Thank you. Last question to Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Sorry, it's more just commentary. So look, Darren, appreciate the laying out of your political reality, 5 of 13. But also from our perspective, it's not just that, you've got Wellington City driving high subsidy, you've also got a 7-1 transport rate differential. Like, those are pretty big whacks. So we're having a serious look at the commercial differential. And I guess the ask for you guys is to look at your transport differential as part of that, because we're seeing the externalities. Looks like there's not going to be particularly any growth out of public sector employment, so we need to look a bit out the box. So we appreciate that Wellington, in a sense, needs to drive subsidy across the region for an effective public transport network, but you do have some quite big levers on your end, so just the diplomatic retort.
Yeah, no, I think the difficulty with that, Ben, is that that's a conversation with the people from our council who are not in the room. So that's a conversation that we will have, yeah.
All right. Look, I appreciate officers and your work today. Thank you. And yeah, enjoy the recess. Thanks, guys.